Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. As we sit here in the summer of 2025, we've reached the quarter century mark in the 2000s. Today, and on the next episode, we're going to talk about the last quarter century of Purdue men's basketball and Purdue football. It's going to be men's hoops today, which has completed a 25-year run with far more highs than lows, but a lot of memorable moments in between 2000 and 2025. We'll talk about the timeline of events, some of the best players, the best moments, kind of just a trip down memory lane here as we sit here on July 1st, still 3 weeks or so out from football media days, about a month out from the start of fall practice when we'll really get into the countdown to kickoff here on the show. And then about 2 months away, a little bit less than that, from the start of football season when this show gets really fun again. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. We're talking all summer there. There's a little bit to talk about here and there. Come join the conversation and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. There aren't many programs in Division I men's college basketball that can claim to have just had 2 men's basketball coaches since 2000. Even fewer can take that all the way back to 1980. Purdue, Duke, Michigan State, Oakland. I don't know who else I'm forgetting in there, but there can't be many. But Purdue's stability has been a really defining theme of the past 25 years. And of course, you can go farther back than that. We're just kind of focusing in since Y2K here on the show today. But it didn't necessarily start out that way. The 2000s started off with a common theme of Purdue basketball during this time frame with another near miss. The type of near miss that Purdue fans know all too well. It wasn't really supposed to be. Purdue had a good team in 2000. It went 21-8 in the regular season. Nice Big Ten play, 12-4. But a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament, when you're a 6 seed, you're not thinking Final Four. But Purdue went on a run. And it got Wisconsin, a familiar team that it played 3 times already, in the Elite Eight, an 8 seed Wisconsin, with a chance to finally break through. Get Gene Cady to his first Final Four, one that would have been played in Indianapolis, one that ended up being won by Michigan State, the last championship by a Big Ten team, as a member of the Big Ten Conference, that is. But Purdue fell short. Purdue lost to Wisconsin and Albuquerque, and that really ended Gene Cady's chances of getting to that Final Four. Purdue said goodbye to a really good group of seniors that year. Brian Cardinal, the late Jerron Cornell, Mike Robinson, Greg McQuay. It didn't have much in the pipeline. At that time, it's funny looking back, and this is still probably the case today, but especially at that time, it was really hard for aging coaches to recruit. Because remember, at that time, the NBA didn't have the one and done rule. So the super elite guys were going out of high school. So when you were recruiting high school guys, everyone was planning to be there for a while. And Purdue always would have had to combat the recruiting pitch of, well, he's not going to be there for that long. He won't be there for your full time. Purdue's facilities were not in great shape at that point either. Purdue had a ways to go from an investment standpoint. And yes, Purdue had some good players that we'll get to. Willie Dean, Kenny Lowe, getting David Teague and Carl Landry in the door. Purdue had good players, but Purdue never got back to a competitive space nationally after that 2000 team under Gene Cady. The 2000 team was his last real chance. And, for over 2 decades, it felt like he would be excluded from the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame because of that one missing line item from his resume. Ultimately, A year or two ago, that was changed. He finally got inducted into the Hall of Fame, as he rightfully should. But in Gene Katie's last 5 seasons at Purdue, Purdue only made the NCAA tournament once. It culminated with a 7-21 record in Gene Katie's final season. That was the 2005 year. That was after the succession plan had been announced. Matt Painter was brought on staff for that year, and Purdue turned in its worst record since 1953. Now, that's not to say that there weren't positives during Gene Katie's last few years. Purdue had a very memorable Great Alaskan Shootout win over Duke. That was probably the highlight of those 5 seasons. As I said, Purdue only made the NCAA tournament once. I think it was a big Melvin Buckley game in the first round, right? In 2002, 2003, where they won before he transferred to South Florida. It just nothing ever clicked for Purdue. And by the end of that stretch, Purdue was really, really struggling. Purdue rolled the dice on that succession plan. It paid off in unfathomable fashion. The way it all worked out, the domino effect, is pretty crazy here. Because forever, and I'm just going anecdotally off of what I've heard. As many of you know, I wasn't really alive for most of the Gene Katie era and was awfully young when this all happened. But it always made sense that Bruce Weber would be the one to take over Purdue. He was a longtime Gene Katie assistant. He was building a really nice program at Southern Illinois. But Roy Williams leaves Kansas for North Carolina. So Bill Self leaves Illinois, where he's building a monster program. D. Brown, Darren Williams, Roger Powell, Luther Head, Augustine, those guys. That was all Bill Self's work, getting them to Illinois. He leaves for Kansas. So Bruce Weber takes the Illinois job, and Matt Painter replaces Bruce Weber at Southern Illinois. He was an assistant for Bruce Weber and slides up to the head coaching spot. But because of that, Bruce Weber isn't going to leave Illinois for Purdue, not when Illinois was where it was then. So Matt Painter slides after 1 year at Southern Illinois, a very successful year, mind you, but just 1 year at Southern Illinois, to be the coach in waiting at Purdue when he's like 33, 34 years old. Incredibly young. There's a reason you don't see this much anymore. I know the High Point guy just went to Creighton to do it, but in general, you don't see this very often because it rarely works. Guys win too much and it gets delayed and then someone gets impatient. The timing is really tricky. We'll talk about how it didn't work for Purdue football in the next episode when Danny Hope was named the coach in waiting for Joe Tiller. It hasn't gone well most of the time, but it was a home run for Purdue. It was the shining achievement of Morgan Burke's tenure as Purdue's athletic director. But it didn't start easily for Matt Painter. That first year's team was awful, but it all worked out for the best because David Teague and Carl Landry redshirted that year. If I remember correctly, it was David Teague who was injured. Carl Landry was not 100%. And early on in the season, he decided to redshirt. So those two got an extra year to use in Matt Painter's second season. That first year for Painter turned into a wash. Purdue goes 9-19. Purdue goes 3-13 in Big Ten play. Scrappy team, not a good team. That remains one of just 3 seasons that Matt Painter has not made the NCAA tournament. He's been at Purdue for 20 now. Decent success rate there. Purdue started to take off a little bit in that second season, though, because Landry and Teague were really good, legitimately good players. Carl Landry played in the NBA for pushing 10 years. He was around for a while. David Teague, really dynamic guard in that backcourt. Good player. Chris Kramer became a fan favorite. The image from that season will always be him hitting the shot from his knees in the NCAA tournament win over Arizona. And then Purdue gives Florida everything it could ask for and then some in the second round of the NCAA tournament. That was the Joakim Noah, Corey Brewer, Al Horford Florida team that was a buzzsaw. And man, Purdue gave them everything they could have wanted. And that kind of laid the foundation for what Purdue was early on in Matt Painter's tenure, which was a defensive-minded team, even with the baby Boilers. And they came in that first year, they really ignite the fuse. In that first season, you knew, and this is when my memory of Purdue basketball really takes off. I remember that NCAA tournament with Carl Landry and David Teague. I remember that season pretty well. But when Robbie Hummel and E'Twaun Moore and Jawan Johnson and Scott Martin came in that first year, you knew Purdue had something special there. I remember Robbie Hummel and E'Twaun Moore shining in a win over Michigan State, a court storming against Wisconsin. Purdue went 15-3 in Big Ten play that year with two sophomores, Keaton Grant and Chris Kramer, two freshmen, Robbie Hummel and E'Twaun Moore, and then you're kind of splitting time between Nemanja Calasan and Jawan Johnson at the 5, a pretty raw Jawan Johnson at that time. That's nuts. Purdue got as high as 14th in the AP poll that year. That was the first time that Purdue was ranked in 4 years. And, you know, the Scott Martin thing didn't work out. He went to Notre Dame where he had a nice career. But you knew the future was bright for Purdue at that point. What Purdue had in that recruiting class was really special. Even though year 2 probably didn't go the way Purdue had hoped. I remember the Duke game being what was really built up for when Purdue hosted Duke in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. And Mackey Arena was on one for that game. And it's really just the shining example of just what Mike Krzyzewski built at Duke, where they were getting Purdue's best shot. That was built up as a Super Bowl atmosphere for Purdue. And Duke handled Purdue pretty easily. A good Purdue team. But Purdue took some lumps that year. The Big Ten was good. Purdue went from 15-3 to 11-7 in Big Ten play. But Purdue won the Big Ten tournament. It got a 4 seed, and it advanced to the second weekend. It had a nice year. A step forward in terms of NCAA tournament results. And entering the next year, it was a fever pitch. But in hindsight, it's all just a what if. Because Purdue was rolling in 2010. Purdue started 14-0. It had an epic win over West Virginia on New Year's Day. An unbelievable atmosphere for being a Christmas break game, a top 10 matchup against another really good program. That West Virginia team went to the Final Four that season when Deshaun Butler, right? That was his name, Deshaun Butler, got hurt late in the game against Duke, I think. That was an awesome atmosphere, and Purdue handled them. Purdue had a weird little 3-game losing streak in there. They lost at Northwestern. If I recall, that was the game when Robbie Hummel hit 1,000,000 threes in the first half, but Evan Turner came back and got Purdue. Or was that the year before? I can't remember. But Purdue was 23-3, ranked number 3 in the country, and then it happened. Robbie Hummel goes down in that game at Minnesota. Purdue ultimately wins that game. Keaton Grant hits a game winner, but all the wind had been removed from the sails. Purdue won 2 of its last 3. It won on senior day, sent Chris Kramer out on a positive note, but you couldn't replace someone who was averaging 16-7 at the 4 spot like Robbie Hummel. A dynamic scorer, someone who could create his own shot so well. And at this time, one of the themes of these teams was as good as they were, and as talented as that top line was, there was not a lot of depth. So Robbie Hummel gets hurt, and you're plugging in like a freshman DJ Bird to play the 4. He wasn't ready for that. That was a stretch. DJ Bird was like 6'5", man. That's a stretch to play him at the 4. That team all three of the big three averaged more than 15 points a game. No one else averaged more than 7. Purdue got to the Sweet 16. Chris Kramer had the game-winning layup against A&M. Was that in overtime or at the end of regulation? I can't remember. But it had no chance in the Sweet 16 against Duke. With Robbie Hummel, completely different game. But Purdue got dinged in classic fashion that year because Robbie Hummel got hurt. It was the Kenyon Martin situation when he was at Cincinnati, when he got hurt. And it's why teams now will never make a prognosis about a player before Selection Sunday, unless you know, right? I mean, there was no hiding that Robbie Hummel tore his ACL. But Purdue drops to a 4 seed, despite really its resume did not indicate it being a 4 seed other than Robbie Hummel was injured. The Final Four was in Indianapolis that year. That was the Gordon Hayward year. That's the biggest what if in Purdue history. It is just gut-wrenching when you look back on it because so much could look different. From that point on, Purdue went 14 years before it got to the Final Four. That narrative could have been dead in 2010. Hell, Purdue could have won a national championship in 2010. It was awfully thin, but man, that was a good team that played really good defense, and if it had just enough on offense to do it, it could have done it. And things look a lot different. 2011 was the same deal. Purdue wouldn't have been as good, probably, even with a healthy Robbie Hummel, because Chris Kramer and Keaton Grant were big losses. Lewis Jackson was a good replacement. I don't know that Tyrone Johnson was on that level yet. DJ Bird wasn't. Ryan Smith played a bigger role and was a nice shooter, but when Hummel retore his ACL, it was just another crushing blow. And I'll never forget being at Ross-Ade Stadium that day. A beautiful October day. A bad Purdue team is just rolling past Minnesota. It was the day when Purdue celebrated the Rose Bowl team. And Purdue was in the Rose Bowl jerseys wearing white at home. One of only 2 times I can ever recall Purdue wearing white uniforms at home, the other being the space uniforms, wearing the Rose Bowl helmets. And as that game goes on, the word got it throughout the stadium. And I remember being in the little team store there at the north end of the stadium. And in between college football coverage, Dick Vitale was on ESPN talking about Robbie Hummel being hurt and out for the season. And it just, any positive vibes that came out of Purdue football winning that day and, really being the only, a good win and just an awful season were gone. Because Purdue was in the preseason top 5 in all of those way too early polls. I remember ESPN having them second or third. And Purdue still had good moments that year. Purdue started 15-1. Etuan Moore had one of the best performances I've ever seen from a Purdue player, scoring 38 points on number 2 Ohio State in Mackey Arena. Jawan Johnson won Big Ten Player of the Year and was a first-team All-American and completed a development course. He was a highly regarded recruit, a 4-star recruit. But the way he developed from being a really raw piece early on in his career into being the Big Ten Player of the Year, a first-team All-American, was very impressive. But again, it ended on a sour note, and it just left the what if taste in your mouth, because Purdue got throttled in the Big Ten tournament by Michigan State, just blown out, after it had lost a game out of nowhere at a bad Iowa team to close out the regular season. And then in the second round, Purdue got boat raced by VCU. In the second round, that was Shaka's VCU team that made it to the Final Four. And it left a really empty feeling from an era that was so much fun for Purdue fans. There were so many great moments that I could do an episode on that in itself, and maybe that's something I should do next summer, is dive deep into these eras. But, the next year was a weird feeling because Robbie Hummel was still around, but what was to become of Purdue in the next couple of years was really evident. You had Robbie Hummel, you had Lewis Jackson, and you had Ryan Smith. And outside of those three, there just wasn't much there. And that Purdue team fought. Robbie Hummel did everything he could. He obviously, played through a lot, a double reconstructed knee, performed admirably, had a great year, won the Lowe's Senior Class Award. Purdue almost pulled off a remarkable upset in that second round against Kansas. I mean, Robbie Hummel was unbelievable in that game until Kansas threw just a complete junk defense at him and made everyone else for Purdue try to beat them, and they simply couldn't. But in hindsight, it was really obvious with that team that Purdue was in trouble after Hummel, Jackson, and Smith were leaving. And it especially became the case when you realized that recruiting class that was going to be freshmen the following season, that was Ronnie Johnson, that was A.J. Hammonds, that was Jay Simpson. Boy, another name or two in there probably. Anthony Johnson was already on campus. It just didn't work out. None of it worked out. Purdue had some good athleticism on those teams. Jay Simpson's a sad what-if story. He was medically ineligible, couldn't, had a heart condition or something where he couldn't play. Tyrone Johnson became the most anonymous 1,000-point scorer in Purdue history. Purdue couldn't shoot. And if you want to talk about why Purdue looks the way it does now, look back to these teams that just couldn't shoot and were horrendous to watch on offense. No leadership at all. No character on those teams. That's why Purdue looks a lot like it does now. And Matt Painter told the media after that 2014 season, Purdue had finished dead last in the Big Ten after it played in the CBI in 2013. You want to talk about a memory. Scrolling through DirecTV to find the most obscure channel that Purdue versus Western Illinois and Purdue versus Santa Clara were on in the CBI in 2013. I remember not being able to find the Santa Clara game, so I listened to Larry Clisby, just in disgust, talk about Purdue losing inside Mackey Arena to Santa Clara in the CBI. Not good. But after 2014, Purdue finished last in the Big Ten. Matt Painter told the media that his program would change, and it did. Since then, Purdue has prioritized skills over raw measurables, and it's paid dividends to this point for Purdue. The only two real holdovers from that group that finished up that I can think of are Raphael Davis and A.J. Hammonds. Purdue brought in some transfers during that time. John Octius was a huge one. What John Octius did was massive. Purdue got back to the tournament in 2015, and Octius was 16. Who was 15? Someone was on the 15 team. Time flies. But Purdue got back to the tournament in 15, lost to Cincinnati. But during that season, you at least felt decent about where Purdue was and where Purdue was going, because Vince Edwards, Isaac Haas, Dakota Mathias, and P.J. Thompson were freshmen. Mathias had mono, so he didn't do much, but you saw flashes with that group of something that could be special. And then Caleb Swanigan joined the core, and you had a really nice group. You had ultimate size with A.J. Hammonds, with Caleb Swanigan, with Isaac Haas. You had some giants. You had Vince Edwards, a really dynamic piece, and you had guards who could shoot it. At that point, Kendall Stevens was still around for a little bit. And at that point, Ryan Klein came into the fold along with Caleb Swanigan, if my timing's correct there. I think it is. Purdue did some really good things. These were good Purdue teams. Remember, with Swanigan, what a big recruiting win. He was committed to Michigan State before he was committed to Purdue. And he's still the only McDonald's All-American to come to West Lafayette to this day. Purdue saw some nice success. The NCAA tournament losses were rough, man. The Little Rock loss was really tough because it sent A.J. Hammonds and Raphael Davis out without having won an NCAA tournament game. And those two gave a lot to Purdue. They were a big part of that culture changing. especially Rafael Davis, and to not have an NCAA tournament win is a bummer for those guys. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's a bummer that they didn't get that on their resume, because those two played a real role in Purdue getting back on track. 2017 was the year that felt like Purdue came all the way back, though. Purdue won the Big Ten title. It did so on a memorable senior night win over Indiana. It had a wild comeback in the Crossroads Classic against Notre Dame. Caleb Swanigan was such a great story, and it's hard to talk about at this point just because the ending is so sad. You know, Caleb Swanigan's third anniversary of his passing was the other day, and it became an ultimate just sad story of, you know, of what could have been and what ultimately is just such a sad story of addiction and some of the real factors that exist in this world. But what Caleb Swanigan did at Purdue was special. His story took over college basketball that year and was really, really cool. He put himself in the National Player of the Year race. He became an NBA first-round pick, and you know, everything that happened in his last couple years of life, just one of the more shocking and sad stories I can remember. But that season and his story and all of the positives that came of that are one that Purdue fans will remember for a long time. When he was out the door, little was expected of Purdue that next year, but Carson Edwards had other ideas. Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, Isaac Haas, P.J. Thompson were seniors. Carson Edwards exploded that season. I believe he won the Shooting Guard Award, the Jerry West Award. I get all of those mixed up. He was awesome, and those seniors were awesome, and Ryan Klein had a good year. And as a freshman, Matt Harms had a really good year as a role player. That team lost a couple of weird games in the Bahamas, and then it won 19 in a row. You don't hear of teams winning 19 games in a row in college basketball, and that team ripped it off and didn't have many close games in the process. It had an epic game against Michigan and Mackey when Vince Edwards and Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman were going back and forth, just throwing haymakers at one another, and Purdue pulled it off. But there weren't many close games in that 19. Purdue lost 3 in a row, Ohio State, at Michigan State, a weird one at Wisconsin, but it finished strong. And that loss at Wisconsin, or the Keita Bates Diop tip-in at Mackey, or the Miles Bridges bomb in East Lansing, any one of those kept Purdue from winning back-to-back Big Ten titles. That was an ultimate offensive efficiency team. Just a terrific outside shooting team. Isaac Haas had a good year. Again, another what if. Now, not as much in this case, because Isaac Haas got hurt in the NCAA tournament. We know where Purdue was seated, and I don't know that Purdue could have gotten past Villanova in the Elite Eight. Now, could Purdue have just gotten ballistically hot from 3 and done it? Yeah, because that team had it in it. We saw what Carson Edwards did the next year in the NCAA tournament. Could he have done that? Sure. Vince Edwards had some big games. Could that have happened? Absolutely. I think Purdue would have beaten Texas Tech and gotten to an Elite Eight, but that Villanova team was awfully special. And again, another case of a really memorable group ending in a bit of a what if because Isaac Haas got hurt. But boy, the following season was really something. You knew Carson Edwards would have a big year, and you knew Ryan Klein was going to shoot a lot of threes, but I had no idea. No one knew what to expect besides that. And it was ugly early on. Purdue was 6-5, and there was some real fever in the fan base. I remember driving back from Indianapolis when Purdue looked horrible, losing to Notre Dame in the Crossroads Classic, giving up 88 points. Carson Edwards really struggled, but Purdue got hot. Purdue became a team that was just really letting it rip on offense, and it pieced things together defensively as the season went along. It got a lot better there. Travion Williams came into the fold a little bit and became a part of the team when he wasn't all that physically ready to be. And Purdue ended up sharing the Big Ten regular season title that year, out of nowhere, out of absolutely nowhere. Carson Edwards was a big reason why. Grady Eifert was phenomenal. Matt Harms was really good on that team. Ryan Klein was great. Carson Edwards was an enigma, man. It's funny because Carson Edwards ended with the most legendary NCAA tournament run in Purdue history. That run was absurd. I believe he still has the record for most threes in an NCAA tournament. I don't know if the Florida guy broke that this year or not, but because of that, we forget how bad he was struggling down the stretch. Really, really struggling. There were some really rough games in there, but Purdue just kept finding ways to win. He went 4 for 24 in a game at Assembly Hall that Purdue won 48-46. Just crazy. In hindsight, there's a reason why Aaron Wheeler never beat out Grady Eifert that year, despite what all the message boards said. Great role players on that team, but the NCAA tournament run, 26 against Old Dominion, 42 against Villanova, 29 against Tennessee, 42 against Virginia. Ryan Klein against Tennessee was unbelievable. I don't think that Purdue team was capable of winning a national title, even it got past Virginia, but maybe it was. Maybe Carson Edwards had 2 more in him. I don't know. A heartbreaker of epic proportions. It really was. And it just tack it on to the what ifs, because that was really, really a heartbreaker that, man, Purdue could have won that game. It really could have. And it resounded even more because the next season was rough. Purdue had nothing in the backcourt, really. Whether the bottom fell out or not is up to you, but there would not have been an NCAA tournament. If there was an NCAA tournament that year, Purdue wouldn't have been in it. The Matt Harms, Travion Williams combination was good, but it wasn't great. Aaron Wheeler didn't take the step forward that a lot of folks had hoped for. Nogel Eastern's offensive struggles were just really amplified. Outside of Sasha Stefanovic, there wasn't much three-point shooting on that team. Jihad Proctor didn't develop into a big-time contributor. Purdue lost 4 or 5 games at Mackey Arena that year. That was weird. That was unfamiliar. And it culminated really weirdly. COVID shut things down. Matt Harms and Nogel Eastern transferred. Maybe May of COVID time. Weird. What a weird time that was. But that happened, and you just felt like Purdue was in this really weird place. You felt okay about what was coming in the future, but that 2019 loss just felt like it lingered even heavier. And in hindsight, the year that was the COVID season was just so bizarre. Purdue got a lot better as the season progressed. Purdue had a really nice year. Travion Williams had the best year of his career. Jaden Ivey emerged as a real superstar by the end of that season. Zach Edey showed flashes of becoming an excellent player. The loss to North Texas was probably a reflection of a team that outkicked its coverage a little bit. It was playing better than it really was towards the end of the season, and it came down to earth in that game when it just couldn't get stops. But Purdue overachieved a bit, and it led to a lot of optimism coming into a year that I think is probably the most confounding season in Purdue basketball history, at least in my time frame, because on one hand, Jaden Ivey turned himself into a top 5 NBA draft pick. Purdue reached number 1 in the AP poll for the first time in school history. Zach Edey really showed some growth, but Purdue struggled mightily defensively. The worst defensive Purdue team I can recall. It turned the ball over in bunches and really lacked a true point guard. It lost a handful of games that cost it a Big Ten title. So many close losses. The Ron Harper shot. Tyson Walker hitting a game winner. Chucky Hepburn banking in a game winner. What else am I forgetting? They lost like 6 Big Ten games that year. There's got to be an obvious one I'm forgetting. Johnny Davis went nuts on them at Mackey Arena and beat Purdue. But, Rob Finney at Indiana. It felt like a big missed opportunity because Purdue didn't end up winning anything that year. It didn't win the Big Ten. It turned it over a million times in the Big Ten championship game in the tournament and lost to Iowa. And then it lost to St. Peter's in the Sweet 16. And, it felt like such a big missed opportunity for 7 or 8 months until Purdue was back number 1 in the country. And just, again, another season where Purdue outkicked its coverage by so much. I still don't know how that Purdue team was as good as it was winning as many games as it did. Because Zach Edey was incredible, and the 2 freshman guards were really good for being freshman guards who were asked to do a ton for Purdue. All of those flaws got exposed at the worst possible time. Purdue won the Big Ten by 3 games that year. Purdue won the Big Ten tournament. It had a dominant performance at PK 85, an all-time stacked MTE field where it beat West Virginia, Gonzaga, and Kansas in 3 games in a row. But the way all of that season gets remembered is by one thing, right? And that's Purdue going down in infamy as the second team to ever lose to a 16 seed. And I've talked about this and I've alluded to it on the podcast before, and I promise we're almost done here. We're well over 30 minutes in. I believe that truly marked another turning point in Purdue's recruiting strategy. Since the loss to FDU, and I'm recording this on July 1st, 2025, since that loss, March 17th of 23, Purdue has not taken a commitment from a guard or wing who can't dribble. Lance Jones came in from the portal. He could dribble. Since then, it's accepted commitments from C.J. Cox, Jakari Harris, Antoine West, and Luke Ertl. Am I forgetting anyone? Benter was already committed. Colvin and Heidi were already committed. Heidi was already on the roster. That was a huge part of that team's weakness, was ball handling. And you have seen Purdue pivot like crazy to fix it. Because that loss was, just brutal. And it's so college basketball that you remember that season with so many great moments, so many wonderful accomplishments, being number 1, a really epic win at Michigan State on Martin Luther King Day. But you remember it for what happens in the single elimination tournament. It's very college basketball. It's the biggest thing I struggle with in college basketball, but it is what it is. But as they say, all's well that ends well, and Purdue got its redemption the following season, going to the national title game. Zach Edey cemented himself as the greatest player in Purdue history. He became the all-time leading scorer, the all-time leading rebounder, and the best player in Purdue history. Lance Jones endeared himself to the fan base as the perfect transfer for that team. Personality-wise, skill set-wise, it was perfect. Braden Smith blossomed into a legitimate star, first-team All-Big Ten. Purdue had the resolve of a team that would be denied nothing, because what it dealt with, not just the pressure that was on them internally, because that team knew it had to get to the Final Four, but from the outside, you can go back. When Purdue lost at Northwestern, the freak out from the fan base was unlike anything you'll see for a regular season loss in December. Mass panic. After every loss, after Ohio State, after Nebraska, the Big Ten tournament loss, no one really cared. But there was a ton of pressure on that team. And it went to Indianapolis. Grambling was what it was. It beat the crap out of Utah State. That was when you probably got a pretty good idea that Purdue was going to be fine. It got past Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. And then you had a truly epic game in the Elite Eight against Tennessee. Zach Edey and Dalton Connect, just a treat for college basketball fans. And Matt Painter got the Final Four he deserved. The scene in Detroit was cathartic for Purdue fans. I was there. I was fortunate enough to be at the Elite Eight when Purdue won, and then I was in Phoenix. And what a turnout that was. It was just unforgettable. Hearing "Let's Go Boilers" chanted in the concourse from the moment doors opened to, middle of the second half when you knew UConn was going to win that game. Just crazy. And as we enter another season where Purdue has those types of expectations, it feels a little like deja vu. Because last season's team feels like it has a little bit in common with the 22-23 team. No, they didn't lose to a 16 seed. In fact, they played a 1 seed to the last second in the Sweet 16. But Purdue gets a ton back from a really good team. And it hopes it'll have added a couple of transfers that are really big-time additions. This team has a couple freshmen, at least one freshman, Omer Meyer, who you think can be a really big part of this team. It feels like deja vu. It hopes that this Purdue team can become an elite team, the way that Final Four team was 2 years ago. This episode is brought to you by me, yes, me. When I'm not watching sports, or more accurately, talking about them, I'm talking insurance with the people of Indiana. As an agent with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance, I want to help you protect what you've worked hard to achieve. From home and auto to life and business insurance, I'm here to help you. Give me a call at 317-846-5861 or email me, jordan.jones@infarmbureau.com. Let's protect you from life's everyday risks. So what's next for Purdue here? Over this time, Purdue has established itself as one of the best, most consistent programs in America. You've seen Purdue build a little more cachet. I think Purdue gets more respect nationally now than it ever has. You're seeing Purdue involved with some pretty high-caliber recruits. That's not something that's always been the case. Be careful what you wish for there. You can't abandon what's gotten you to this point. Purdue's recruited substance really well in a way that's not easy to do. But there's not a lot of reason to believe that Purdue's slowing down anytime soon. Matt Painter has established himself as one of the elite coaches in the country. It will take a national championship for him to be widely regarded as the top of the top in that top tier. But when that happens, he'll be right in that mix where he belongs. Mackey Arena has become one of the best environments in the nation and is widely regarded as that. As you project out in the future, there's a ton to be optimistic about. Purdue handled the NIL crazy, transfer crazy landscape as well as anyone and has maintained a culture during that time that's not easy to do. This feels sustainable, what Purdue is doing. Will there be transfers? Yes, absolutely. Will there be years where Purdue isn't, a top 10, top 15 team? Yeah. It kind of just had one. But there's not a lot of reason to think that the bottom's going to fall out here. There's a lot to really, really like about what Purdue is doing. And as we look back on the last, 25 years, you see these moments in time that have gotten to Purdue where it is today. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch here over the next 5 to 10 years to see what Matt Painter can do and to see if this coming year can be his one shining moment, literally and figuratively, and to see if he can finally break through and get to that upper echelon that he deserves to be in. That's all I've got for this, guys. I hope this was fun. A little lighthearted look back at some memories. We're going to do it again here, probably to post that week of the 14th about Purdue football, looking back at the last 25 years there, because you want to talk about a roller coaster. Oh, baby. That's one that you only find at Cedar Point. But Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you all. I hope you have a great 4th of July weekend. Safe travels. Be safe out there, but enjoy celebrating our country. And send any questions over. Send anything you want me to talk about here. Email me, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Tweet it to me, boilersbeyond. We got some time here before we dive into football. We have a great guest coming up to preview football here in early August. I'm excited about that. But until then, guys, take care, be safe, and enjoy the holiday weekend.